Good afternoon. My name is Courtney Taylor. I am the E4 Carolina's Digital Communication Manager. I just want to take some time today before we start our presentation to thank everyone for coming to attend Making Diversity Work. I'm excited about today's panel. It's going to be some great discussions today and some great breakout rooms for interaction. We will touch on topics that some of you may have experienced or want to be proactive in your workplace. And if some of these situations may arise, you will have some ideas of what to do and where to go. Or you may just be curious about wanting to know what this webinar is about. Just also want to take some time to address a concern about the intent of this panel discussion. This webinar is intended to highlight topics on DE&I, and some information was taken out of context. And if you have more concerns, please send me an email privately, and I will leave my email in the chat box to have more further individual discussions. This is definitely a lesson learned. Maybe we can have a bigger format for this discussion later on. So please reach out if you have any other questions and let me know. And let's get into today's discussion. And I want to welcome our Communications Task Force 2022 sponsor and our moderator, Diane Chase, which is the Vice President of C4CS. Diane.
Thank you. Thank you, Courtney. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you. Thank you for taking some time to dig into this important topic. I know we are hearing DE&I all over the place, and we really want to take time today to get in depth about what it means, why it's important, and why we really need to understand the power of incorporating DE&I in all of our organizations. So I'm thrilled to be with this panel of experts today and honored to be here on behalf of C4CS. The Center for Communication Strategies is how we were actually born, but now we are C4CS. Our areas of expertise cover all sorts of strategic communication. Our expertise lies specifically in crisis communication, media training, key message development, issues, risk, reputation, communication, management, and planning. So if it has to do with strategic communication, that is where we really can help you and bring an expertise, a group of experts from across various disciplines of strategic communication to work with you and your organizations to help you preserve your reputation, your brand equity, and your bottom line. So that's a little bit about C4CS, and we have been sponsoring and part of a member of E4 for I think 4 years now, Courtney, and it's been an amazing organization, and just really thrilled to be on the communications task force. So shall we jump in? I am amazed at this stellar group of women we have with us today. And you'll see the names and titles on the slide there that is being shown by Courtney. Maria Tamburi, who is Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Employee Engagement for Dominion Energy. Hello, Maria. Pamela Fan, she is the CEO of Integrated Solutions. Lori Dowling is the Executive Director of the National Utilities Diversity Council, and Sydney Echeverria is Diversity and Inclusion Program Manager for Duke Energy. Welcome, welcome all of you, and welcome to our attendees today. I'd like to just go ahead and get us rolling here by setting the stage with a few numbers that I pulled out. You know, in the energy industry today, only 25% of energy workers are female, and that's compared to the overall labor force average of 47% across the nation. 8% of energy workers are Black or African American, compared to a 12% national workforce average. Hispanic or Latinx individuals comprise 16% of energy workers, compared to 18% of the national labor force. And you know, it was interesting, I was pulling up a lot of different articles looking at some statistics, some demographics across the energy industry in terms of diversity. And surprisingly to me, the clean energy and renewable energy sector has the biggest challenge in terms of DE&I. So I'm looking forward to hearing some thoughts from our panelists about why you think that might be. My thinking was the traditional energy industry is frankly and factually really driven by white males. It has been historically that way. And you would think that the new clean, sustainable innovation energy folks would be really keen on having a diverse workforce. So that was really some interesting fodder for thought. All right, so I'm going to let our panelists say a little bit about themselves as we go around, but let's start with a question for each of you. I'd like for each of you to define individually what you term as diversity, what you term as inclusion, and what you term as equity. And Pamela Fan, I'd love for you to kick us off.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you all and E4 for having me today. So diversity to me, one, it is definitely visual because representation matters. So if I see it, I can believe it and I can know that it can happen for me as well. So yes, diversity is visual, but it's also diversity of thought. So just because you have two women in the room does not mean that each of those women think alike. Just because you have two minorities in the room, it does not mean that they think alike. So you want to ensure that you're including diversity of thought as well as ensuring that representation is there. So that's diversity. Equity for me, it means that me having the same as you does not threaten you, but it actually betters us all. So, just an understanding that, because we're equal, you should not be threatened by equalness. It makes everything better. It makes us all better. And then inclusion, for me means that my opinions, my thoughts, my contributions, that they're valued. Not only are they valued, they're considered, they're utilized, and that it's celebrated. So that's what inclusion means to me as well. So thank you, Diane, for that question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pamela. And how about we go next to Maria with Dominion Energy?
Hi. Hi, how are you? So I'm going to use Dominion Energy. We launched our first DE&I report last year, which I was very, very happy to be a part of sort of building that. So I'm going to, definitely use what we use in the report and what the company and Dominion Energy stands by as we look at these definitions. Very similar to what Pam said, collection of differences and similarities, race, ethnicity, individual characteristics, values, beliefs, life experiences, culture, preferences and abilities. That is diversity as we look at it. Equity, the outcome that we achieve when we remove barriers and providing opportunities and resources needed to level the playing field. And then inclusion is to be intentional. The action of all employees and all people in contributing to the company's success by supporting and respecting others so that all can bring their full selves to work. Those are some the three definitions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Maria. And as we move along, we'll get more in depth in terms of what these concepts, these efforts, these initiatives actually mean to you personally. All right, Shawn, how about coming up next for us?
So I'm Shawn Hall with E4 Carolina's Hbcu Pathways program. And I think I agree definitely with Pam. Diversity is being able to see it, but also to walk it and talk it. And so it's not just having a Black or a brown face in the room. And it's not solely just the diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's also the belonging, because you can be in a place but not feel that you belong in that place. And so that's a huge piece for me.
Great, thank you. We appreciate you being here today as representing another E4 Carolinas representative. So I wanted to hear from you. All right, Lori, share your thoughts.
Thank you. Well, I would just say, first of all, what my colleagues on the, my fellow panelists have said are really fantastic. And I went to the dictionary, because I like to look things up. And the Merriam-Webster dictionary says that diversity is the condition of being composed of differing elements. And I thought, well, what does that mean to me? To me, that means knowing, acknowledging, and honoring the myriad differences that are comprised of all of us humans. And, to take that to the next place of inclusion, the Oxford English Dictionary says that inclusion is the action of including. So that was helpful. But to me, it's a sibling to diversity, which is once we know, once we honor, and once we acknowledge, we have to make sure that all of that diversity is included in the path forward. And then as to equity, again, the Oxford English Dictionary says it's the quality of being fair or impartial. I think that one of the interesting things about humans that I have noticed is that we don't expect equality in treatment, we expect fairness. And there's a really great exhibit a few years ago at the Exploratorium in San Francisco called The Science of Sharing. And it was based on the National Science Foundation grant that the HERO project received. And what they learned, and it struck me tremendously, is that most people don't expect equality. We don't expect for me, in a nonprofit organization, to be paid the same as the CEO of Duke Energy. But we do expect that we are treated fairly, with a very strong perception of how we see fairness. So I think that equity expects, in our minds, we do the math on equity. We think none of us expect to be treated exactly like our fellows, but we expect to be treated fairly based on our experience and our abilities and the jobs that we do, right? When it comes to opportunities for advancement or for compensation or any other aspect of business attention or appreciation. And I found it very interesting that there was so much data around the way that humans perceive fairness. And so to me, equity and fairness are siblings that go down the hill hand in hand. And so, I think that it doesn't really help to achieve diversity and inclusion, as Shawn said, unless equity is part of this, and until your colleagues and your team members and your fellow employees have the trust that the company or entity that they're working with intends to behave in an equitable way toward them. And once that trust is established, you can really move forward on a lot of fronts, not just with DEI, because the big part of what we do in DEI is really to enable our society to move forward in an equitable way. So anyway, that's my 1.5 cents.
Lori, I think you make such a good point. I think there's so much misunderstanding between equality and equity. And I really appreciate you highlighting that. It's an opportunity for a lot of knowledge sharing, a lot of personal stories, which is a really bailiwick of mine in terms of using personal stories to convey business messages and how powerful that is. So talking about equity versus equality using personal stories, I think is something maybe we can think about. And then Sydney, your thoughts, please.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sydney Echeverria. I think that so everyone's talked a lot about the definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but an easy way to remember it, and I didn't make this up, so I'm borrowing it, is diversity. If we're talking about having diversity, okay, and seeing it play out in a workplace. Diversity is inviting everyone to the dance. So you get to come brown person, you get to come woman, you get to come non-binary. Everyone gets to come to the dance. Inclusion is allowing everyone to contribute. So the keywords, everyone in diversity, contribute, inclusion. Everyone gets to contribute to the playlist. So we're not just going to listen to my music, we'll listen to your music and your music. Everyone gets to contribute. Equity is allowing everyone the opportunity, and that's the keyword for equity, opportunity, to dance. Right. So that's one way to look at the scope of how diversity, equity, and inclusion work together. In the workplace, that shows up a little differently, right? It's everyone gets a chance to apply. All right. Inclusion is when they get there and they walk through your doors, everyone feels like they have a space and an opportunity to contribute. But the equity piece there, it can come in terms of pay, it can come in terms of promotions, but broadly, it's making sure you have systems in place that allow those opportunities to really manifest. So it's one thing to say, everyone can apply, everyone will be considered. When you get here, we're going to treat everybody fairly, but it's something different altogether to have those systems and structures in place that really create that type of environment. So that's how I think about those three things distinctly.
I love the visual. That's very powerful. We can all relate to that, right? So I think that's a great analogy. Thank you for that. So why do you think DE&I is now gaining more attention and becoming more of a priority in organizations, in government, in communities, in our society? Why all of a sudden do we have this great force for building DE&I in our world? Pamela?
Well, honestly, Diane, I think it goes back to the social justice movement over the last couple of years. With the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, really, and people being at home during the pandemic, it made us all really sit and think about, where do we really stand on diversity? Then, you have employees of these organizations who are then demanding some kind of response from their organizations and saying, we're not, we believe this. What is my organization going to do about this? There's no longer really a separation of work and life, right? We always talk about that work-life balance, and there's really not such a thing as a work-life balance. Your full 24 hours is comprised of who you are. And so, that social justice piece in employees, that was showing up at work, and employers had to respond to that. So I think that that's where the highlight of the really kind of the movement began. But this work has been happening for a very long time in many spaces. But I think it's just been highlighted because of the social justice movement.
Good point. Good point. And I'd like to add another piece to that for our panelists in terms of, we went from D&I to DE&I, and now we have DE and I and C. So that contribution piece. So wondered if you had any thoughts, Pam, about why the E all of a sudden showed up.
Well, then you also have the J, right? So we can put all the acronyms in there, justice, contribution. But essentially, it really all comes down to the same thing, is that you can, like we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We talk about belonging. I personally have spoken many times about the fact that I've never felt as if I've belonged in a situation or in a group of people. So therefore, I like to use integration. that feels more comfortable to me. So I think that we can use as many terms as we want, and as many acronyms as we want, because they're all encompassing and they're all valid. Yes, we want to also have fair contribution. Yes, we also want justice. And so I just think that it's going to continue to expand. And as we can think through, like, what else should be added, because diversity, equity, inclusion honestly does not encapsulate all of it. Those 3 letters do not encapsulate everything. So I think that there's going to continue to be more added to that.
Right. And I think maybe that's, it might be more easily comprehended and initiated in organizations if, DE&I is kind of the focus, and then that grows into a more broader, holistic approach to what we're trying to achieve in society and business, right?
Absolutely, because there's more segments when you dig a little bit deeper into what is diversity, what is equity. All of the ladies on the panel had great answers to all of that, but really, what does that mean to that organization? So if we're talking about inclusion, Sydney mentioned contributions, people being able to contribute to a discussion, or being able to feel included. So do you want to call it out? Like, call it out. I think that that's fine. I think that we do have to sometimes be really intentional, but I think the intentionality behind it is what's going to lengthen those acronyms. If we become more intentional about, is it belonging? Is it integration? Is it contribution? Is it just equity? Is it just justice? It's all encompassing of all of those things.
Right. And so as people who are trying to raise the awareness and move this forward in reality, thinking about how we can make it more comprehensible for other decision makers in the industry. Thank you, Pam. Maria, your thoughts?
Yes. I think Pam touched upon really important points. I also think it's culture. I think it's, making sure that intentionality will come when there's a culture of, really being able to have D&I, different approaches to things, different perspectives accepted, right? I agree with Pat. I think for us at Dominion Energy, we have been in this D&I journey for a long time. And again, it's a journey. We don't see D&I as a sprint. We see it as a marathon, something that is, long term, and it will continue. And it will evolve as our nation evolves. And there's going to be different priorities. It's important as an organization to be able to identify and represent the communities that we serve. I think that is, it's pivotal for us to be able to understand our customers and our communities. We need to be able to be the mayor of our communities. So we need that representation in the organization in order to be able to understand their needs, understand what they're looking from us as we supply energy and as we work together. It's also incredibly important to have that diverse perspective, as we discussed. And obviously, equity is incredibly important to make sure that we're all playing in an equitable playing field, and everyone has the same opportunities. But I think when it comes to inclusion, for me, I think the culture of an organization is incredibly important. And, I'm proud that we at our company, do provide that culture of acceptance, that culture of belonging, making sure that our employees come in every day feeling, that they belong, that they're there. We're not necessarily, we understand people have different perspectives. We understand that people have different points of views, but you have to come to work respectful of each other and those different perspectives every day.
Absolutely. Culture is absolutely critical, and leadership has to be driving that DE&I culture. So how do we connect with them in a way that resonates and that actually prompts action on their part? Pam touched a little bit on really employee activism, stakeholder activism, CEO activism, things that we can think about in the discussion as well.
Yeah, and to add one quick thing, I mean, it does have to come from the top. I mean, I think having that engagement from leadership and having that accountability with the rest of the organization is pivotal for the success of D&I in an organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. If leadership is completely bought in, if you'll excuse the phrase, and driving it, then the whole organization is able to rise up to it. Yes, it can come from employees and internal stakeholders, but that's more like pushing a rock up a mountain than if it comes from the leadership down and everyone is really pushing toward the same goals without so many challenges. Fantastic. Sydney, thoughts?
Well, I think that for us, it's a couple of things. It's what Pamela said around there just being this awakening in our country, right? So everybody sort of just, had to sit wherever they were and pay attention. And that was coupled with a lot of introspection, which she also talked about. But that comes along with, we have shareholders. So our shareholders are also at home thinking about themselves and where they wanted to invest their money. And our regulators were at home thinking about that. And our commissioners were at home thinking about these things. And so that coupled with our employees made a perfect storm for us to not have an opportunity to not address this. So let me be clear, we have had a diversity inclusion team for years, and they've done a lot of great work and have worked to move the needle and to have our workforce better reflect the communities that we serve. But there was a different sort of urgency that came with the work following the deaths of George Floyd and others. And, it's been for us, it's not a sprint at all, but we definitely had to pick up the pace. Okay. So, we were doing our thing, but because of all of these external factors and internal factors, we were really being held accountable and are being held accountable in a different way. And I think that is wonderful for us to have to change how we're not change, but improve how we're doing our work. Shawn, did you have a question? Or did you mean?
Yes, I did mean to. And I guess I kind of want to get into the nitty gritty of why George Floyd and why now, because oppression for marginalized people is not new, whether it be in the workplace or any place else. Now, perhaps this was our first time seeing it on TV and it being long and protracted, and you're sitting there and you're watching and you're wondering, is it going to be now? Minute 1, minute 2, minute 3, and it goes on and on. Was it that? And how is that different from Rodney King?
Or Emmett Till, right?
Or Emmett Till. How is it different? And then the corporate response to it, because I like what you said, Sydney, that everyone was sitting at home and they were thinking about our shareholders, our bottom line. And that, in a way, if I'm going to be transparent, and I think that's the only way to be, that bothers me. When we talk about DE&I, is it only about your bottom line, or is it about seeing the next person as a human being?
So I think, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think it's both, but I think if we're being practical, and if I'm the way I live my life inside of work and outside of work should be consistent, right? But I talk to my friends in a very different way than I talk to my boss, right? So I think we have to acknowledge that there are different factors and things that provide us with encouragement around our behaviors. So, two things I want to share to respond to what you said. One is about myself and what I learned about myself. So when George Floyd was murdered, if I can just be completely honest and probably too transparent, I was pissed off. Not only because this man was now dead, but because people were just now figuring out that people had been being killed this whole time. And so, no, I didn't participate. I wasn't on the diversity inclusion team then. I didn't participate in the conversations we were having at work because I didn't feel like it was my role to go explain the history of the United States, right? Because there are books, there are movies, there are all kinds of things you can do to educate yourself. That was my perspective. And then I saw those women get murdered in the nail salon. And I started hearing about Stop Asian Hate. And I was like, this is terrible. Somebody should really do something about this. I can't believe this is happening. And then I started to look, and that's not new either. So I was in my space observing what was happening to my people, and my perspective was very narrow. And I had to step back, and that allowed me to view the reactions that people were having about George Floyd with a different kind of grace, because I wanted that same grace extended to me when I didn't understand what's happening within the Asian community. And that's probably true also for people who don't understand what's happening with people who are transitioning, who are going through gender correction therapy, because that's not in their backyard. The other piece of this is that I feel like we have people at my job who've been there for 40 years, which means they're not 40 years old. They're 60, 70 years old, right? And they've been believing and doing what they do for all of those 50, 60, 70 years. And I think it is admirable for us to try to change their perspective. I think it is realistic for us to say, you do whatever you want to do at your house. Here's what you cannot do here. So I think there's a fine balance with how you apply diversity, equity, inclusion in a structured workplace and what you expect of people and how you calculate and quantify those results. And then what you also try to encourage people to do in terms of their own personal growth and how that is displayed in their daily lives.
That's good questions and good comments. So there's this stage process that I've been reading about, and it starts with fear. It starts with fear across, diversity, equity, inclusion. And what we fear, what we don't know and what we don't understand, to your point, Sydney. And then comes the learning phase, where we open our mind, we take in new thoughts, we're willing to consider new perspectives, learn about populations, communities we don't understand, we don't know, and we are afraid of. And then comes the growth phase. So that's where we actually grow and we become advocates and ambassadors and leaders in the DE&I space or any other, whatever you want to call it. So it is a process, but as we've all, I'm sure, agreed, it's a marathon and not a sprint. And it's an opportunity to be inspiring communicators, to have people inspired by the way we live our values of DE&I. And I really appreciate your point, Sydney. Well made. Pamela, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Sydney, because Sydney really brought it home with those comments there. And so prior to coming into the energy space, I worked for a large company. I worked for Coca-Cola for 22 years. At one point in time during my tenure there was the murder of an unarmed Black man, Terrence Carter, out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And at that time, people were outraged and upset, but we weren't all sitting at home watching it. So, but it was widely newsworthy, and the company put on a town hall for employees to be able to come and share and talk. It was led by the chief global diversity officer at the time, which was Andrew Davis, and the president of North America. And during that, I typically never I never want to speak in front of a group of people, right? I felt compelled to get up and go to the microphone, and I just asked a question. I said, how many people in this room, and we have a room of about 500 and another probably 1,500 globally on the phone, how many people in this room have ever been racially profiled or followed or stopped by police? Every single African-American person in that room, including the chief diversity officer, stood up. There was an audible gasp in the room. And the point I wanted to make in that was that while most people look at those images and they think, yes, that's horrible. Yes, I hate that happened to that person, or he must have been doing something wrong that caused that to happen. We all knew that we were just 1 degree away from that being us, from that being our husband, our brother, our father, our cousin, our son. We all knew that, those people, those minority people in that room. And so what I asked our coworkers and colleagues, I said, look at the person who's standing there. This is your colleague, this is your peer. We're talking about vice presidents, we're saying directors, we're not just talking about the janitors, which they stood up as well. Everyone in that room has experience, we have that shared experience. And that's what we wanted to convey to our colleagues, is that this is an experience that does not discriminate against us. And we want you to know that it's not just those people that you see on TV that it happens to. I just wanted to get that point and kind of drive home Sydney's point in what she was saying, and then also Shawn's, because I think it's very important.
Thank you. Thank you. And Lori, we get to hear from you on this one.
Oh, well, yeah, thank you. Just to say, I think that my colleagues have said everything so brilliantly. But you asked, Diane, sort of why it's gaining attention now. And I would say one additional thing, and that's math. When we look at the population in the United States, and I'm speaking specifically of the United States, not global diversity right now. When we look at the population in the United States, what we know is that the growth in population is primarily occurring among women and people of color, out LGBT folks and people with disabilities, though it is a little bit hard to track those last two categories because they're self-reported. But what we know is that we're not making it as many white guys as we used to. And so if you're a company that relies on human beings to do your labor in any way, and you're following any kind of projections that the Census Bureau gives us or the Bureau of Labor Statistics gives us, you can tell that your white male workforce is diminishing. So what that means is that for all of us who are not white males, the outward package is not as important as it used to be. That is because here's the thing, I've been doing this for a pretty long time, and it's really important to use the levers that you have when they are available to you to use, because the pendulum swings in wacky ways, and suddenly the lever of yesterday may not be available to you tomorrow. And so the lever at this moment, I think, for all of us, if we want to think about advancing diversity and why in addition to all that Pamela and Shawn and Sydney said about why this is why now, I think one of the levers is this is a job seekers market. We are not going to have that forever. God knows it wasn't that way 15 years ago. When you're in a job seekers market, when you're the employer, you become much more creative about trying to find talent and to retain talent. And if you're in the C-suite, or if you're in the board, when I talk to utility industry board members, one of the things they talk a lot about is where DE&I fits into the risk profile of the company. The biggest risk for most companies is not having people who can do your work, right? Because you're going to end up with C-suite officers, pedaling really fast to get the little squirrels to make their generators turn, right? So, so this moment in time, math is our friend. I mean, it probably is all the time, but I'm an arts major, so it hasn't been for me. But at this moment, we can use the lever of a diminution in the workforce and not as many babies as as people were expecting, to allow us to make a change that needs to be made desperately. And Shawn, I agree with you. I hate to think that people do things for reasons other than self-interest, but sometimes companies, especially, I mean, well, that's their job. They have a duty to their shareholders, and it's in the articles of incorporation of every company in the United States. They're required to maximize shareholder benefit, and we can use that lever at this moment to make a change for returning citizens, for young males of color, for out LGBT folks, people with disabilities, a lot of us who have really been not on the radar screen when it comes to optimum employees for a long time.
You make some excellent points, all of you, obviously, but the notion of the labor force changing, Lori, there is clearly a bit of age discrimination going on in the industry as well. There were some interesting statistics, but the number of people 55 and older in the energy sector is diminishing very quickly. So taking that knowledge and seizing on opportunities to figure out how to supplant their impact in a good way, in a DE&I way. It is an opportunity, to your point. And yes, absolutely, the bottom line is, if you don't have a business, you don't have employees and all that good stuff. However, values-driven organizations are more successful than bottom line short-term organizations. There's so much data on that. If my mantra in my trainings and my workshops is, if you put people and purpose as your priority, profits will follow. And it's true. I mean, if you really think about it, it's really true. So thank you for that. Maria, you've had your hand up for a while. Sorry about that.
No, not a problem. So one thing that I wanted to add, I think, so you had what happened to George Floyd, you had the pandemic, you had several other incidents that transpired afterwards, Breonna Taylor and others. You had what happened, with as Sydney talked about, with Asian hate. I think, for us in our company, I mean, we've, like I've said before, we've been on this journey for a long time. But definitely that was kind of a moment to pause and be able to have these very, these conversations internally within, even our leadership and employees, to have, to be able to open up about their, African American, we have, our leaders, SVPs and in senior positions that really talked about their personal experiences. And I think that these discussions provided a vulnerability that, a lot of the employees hadn't seen before, which, kind of humanized the individual and really made people understand what they were going through, that, it wasn't what you were just watching on TV, but these were, experiences that people throughout the organization were, from the senior levels to, the more junior levels, had experienced in their lives. And I think that was an incredible discussion that employees benefited from. I would also say that I think what was unique and a horrible, unfortunate incidents, in plural, the pandemic what that costs as well is this, real focus. And what I think, I'm a forever optimist, right? But what I think that I've been really happy to see is that hasn't really slowed down. I mean, I think that momentum, going to what Lori was talking about, that, realization that you had all the attention focused on D&I. Then you have, the realistic perspective that our population is the minority population is growing, and it's the fastest growing in the United States. So you have these things coming together, which make D&I a priority, and sort of has raised the visibility of this issue, and made people really think, what's my organization doing? What do we continue to do? How do we become more inclusive so we can really continue this journey, and continue to adapt? So I think, it's a real pivotal moment. It's a pivotal moment for us to continue to have these conversations like the ones that we're having today, and really be able to focus that D&I is here to stay. I mean, our country's diverse. If we want to have a workforce that, gets along, that's values driven, that's culture driven, we have to be inclusive and understand each other. And I think we need to look at what's beneficial of, those pluses, those great articles, the McKinsey, Harvard Business Review, that really talk about diverse organizations are very successful because they really are able to bring different points of view to the table. And that's something that at Dominion Energy, obviously, we're definitely focusing on. But that's something that I wanted to add.
That's
kind
great.
of bringing everything together.
That's fantastic. And you're just singing my song with that human to human communication. Again, back to those stories to convey messages that resonate, that are understood, remembered, and retold, because it is in the retelling that you gain power, you gain momentum, right? So that, especially now when there's such a lack of trust, really opening ourselves to share a personal experience to convey a message that we really want to help connect with other people. So let's take a little self-assessment survey. And Courtney's going to bring up, I think she's going to share in the chat a link to DE&I self-assessment. Courtney, can you, there it is. Ask and you shall receive. So let's all of us take a couple of minutes just to go through this and come back and share what we think about it. What did we learn about ourselves? Maybe we have a new awareness of our organization or ourselves. So we'll take this and be back at 20 after 1. How's that? Would love for a couple of folks, if you're open to sharing any thoughts you had about the assessment, what you might have not considered or gleaned from that. Anyone?
Okay, I'll bite. One thing that I noticed, and I think it's not content, but it is instrument development. What happens if a person doesn't know? Because there's some things that I didn't know if this was the case or not. So I don't know if that's an accurate assessment because I was
Shawn, that's
forced to
perfect.
pick.
That's what we built it for.
Oh, okay.
So I can tell you, I built this tool, and part of the reason that we built it the way that we did it was, and the tool is meant for regulators, for C-suite leaders, for corporate board members, as well as people who are doing the work within the companies on diversity, inclusion, and supplier diversity. And for the people who are removed from the day-to-day work of diversity within the company, we didn't want them to just be able to answer yes or no. We wanted them to be able to test their knowledge by asking them to show how it is evinced in each of those instances, right? So, do you have a D&I statement? how is it shared, right? Because if you give people, especially people who don't necessarily have responsibility for the activity, the ability to just answer yes and no without having to make them think about what they know about the topic, they'll just answer yes and no, right? Our goal was to drive those folks to turn to their diversity and inclusion operations and say, well, tell me how it is events. Tell me how does it play out, or tell me how we're reporting to the regulators, right? Because we wanted the regulators to be able to say, you know, what are we learning from companies and how are we learning it? So for every yes or no question, there was meant to be a show us how it applies to you question that would require them to go and find out. And so I'm really happy that you had that response, because that's exactly the response we wanted people to have.
Fantastic. I love it. That's so cool, because then here comes the learning opportunity right before the growth opportunity, right? So that's perfect. That's perfect. Anyone else want to share thoughts from the assessment? Okay. Well, I want to quickly get to our breakout rooms because I'm really looking forward to that discussion, and especially the report outs and the takeaways that that people are going to gain in those conversations. But you did sort of tee up another question there, Laura, and it is, what is an example of where you have seen the impact of a DE&I program, policy, protocol really make an impact? Where have you seen that in organizations? Some examples, Pam, do you have?
Oh, sorry.
I would just say, so while working at the Coca-Cola company, was actually the minority, I'm sorry, it was the millennial business resource group that actually devised at that time the parental family leave. So it didn't focus on maternal family, but also for fathers as well. And so I saw that policy derive straight out of what the millennial resource group wanted to see happen. So even if you think that your DEI committees, like they're only there to, you know, make small action, they can absolutely be powerful in changing the policies in the workings of an organization. So that's one that I'll share.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Talk about a bit of a sea change in terms of just thinking, right? Oh yeah, there's that, you know, two-parent thing. Oh, I don't know. Lori, what about you?
I would turn to a slightly different area, and going back to Pamela's experience at Coca-Cola, I would point to an experience that I got to watch at PepsiCo many years ago, when Steve Reineman was the CEO, and then moving to when Indra Nooyi was the CEO. PepsiCo had had very vibrant employee resource groups across its enterprises, and the one at Frito-Lay was especially enthusiastic, and it was called Adelante, the Latino leadership group there, and they actually wanted to show their ability to make a tremendous difference in the bottom line of the company, and they actually sort of, and a lot of the members were food scientists, and so they went home and they started talking to their grandmas about flavors, and so it ended up becoming, among many other things, the limon, the chili lime, and even what Richard Montañez did with the Flamin' Hot Cheetos, right? So basically they changed the entire face of Frito-Lay, and that completely was driven out of the employee resource group at Frito.
Wow, that's amazing. Fantastic. You know, and that all boils down to listening. We have to listen.
Oh, and I should mention that a lot of those women and men became vice presidents and senior vice presidents and are now in the C-suite at other companies. So it was like the fastest way to get probably also with what you saw, Pamela, at Coke with the millennials, the people who come up with those kind of ideas, it's an opportunity to get the spotlight in a way that many of their bosses and their bosses' bosses don't get.
I
Absolutely.
actually talk about Richard Montanez all the time when I speak in engagements, because
I love him so much.
he started out, y'all, as, if y'all don't know his story, it's amazing, but he started out as a janitor with Frito-Lay, PepsiCo, and loved his job, loved what he did a great job at it. But they had some Fritos that came off the conveyor that had no seasoning on them. He took them home. He and his wife experimented with them. And he's like, I think I have an idea. He actually called the CEO.
That was Roger Enrico. Yeah.
Yes, he called him. And he's like, I couldn't call him, because they always said, be enterprising.
The power of one.
He called them, and they said, well, we're going to be down for an investors meeting. We'd love to test your product. He went to the library and read up on how to do a presentation. His wife had to go buy him a tie. And we're talking about a man who dropped out of school early on to help support his family and work in. And so his story is just so inspiring, and the fact that shows exactly how diversity can impact a company. Flamin' Hot Cheetos, as we all know, was like a top seller. He has gone up through the ranks of the organization. So there's diversity right at play right there.
Well, and now they're making a movie about him. Ava Longoria is directing it right now.
Absolutely,
well,
yes.
Fantastic. And you know what, that speaks so loudly to a culture of innovation, but also safety, that he felt empowered in his position, way far from the ivory tower, to call the CEO. I mean, he had a confidence that there was safety in that cultural space for him to do that. And that's just amazing. I talk about a story of innovation. Oh my gosh. So that's fantastic. Oh, Maria? I've lost track now. I got all excited about your story, Pamela. Maria, how have you seen a specific example of the impact of a DE&I program?
Yeah, I mean, I think all my panelists have such a great examples, but I think on the innovation side is, I think it's a real important perspective that, people forget, that diversity in your workforce really kind of equates to thriving innovation. Those different perspectives, different points of view, different cultures, backgrounds. Richard Montanez, coming with a Hispanic background, figured a way that, to spice up the Cheetos so it's more something that his family and would like. I mean, I'm originally from Buenos Aires, Argentina. We don't really eat a lot of spicy food, but yet, when I eat food, I try to, make it more similar to, the food I eat in my culture. But I feel that in our company, we see innovation, around all our ERGs, our employee resource groups, come up with great ideas that are, really pivotal and important for, for our company to succeed, and not necessarily just around D&I, but ways that you can bring people together and to really have a more inclusive culture. So it's, I think I don't have one specific one to pinpoint, but it is very much, I think there's a lot of literature around that has been written around how innovation and diversity, really go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Creativity, all of that. Fantastic. Sydney.
So I love the story. I hadn't heard that. And so I can't wait
oh my gosh,
to get home and tell my family about it. But, like Maria was just saying, it's the two stories that were told first around the employee resource groups. changing the course of the company are both so powerful. For me, what I've seen is how, and I talked earlier about how, it's admirable to hope people change at work, and that spreads throughout their daily lives. But, we have policies in place to keep the culture what it should be. But as someone said, the real win is when you make that change in someone's life. And so what I've seen is a true cultural shift around people fully recognizing the value proposition that comes with diversity in the workplace. So we had these conversations. We've had them more than once. They were brought back with the murder of George Floyd, but now they're just general. They're called Let's Talk About It. And so an ERG or a diversity inclusion council or just an executive can say, we're going to host a Let's Talk About It about XYZ topic. And before COVID, these would have been very limited, right? It would have been who can fit in the conference room. But with Teams, which is what we use, the platform we use, anyone across our enterprise who has the hour to give can join. And so we had George Floyd's uncle come talk about the impact of his death on their family and what they're doing to sort of honor his legacy. We kicked off our first Native American employee resource group. And we had tribal people who are members of various tribes lead that Let's Talk About It. So they were able to answer questions. So someone said, and it was all from a great place, I really love your costume. And they had an opportunity to say, not costumes, and that was a learning for that person. We had one about code switching, and a gentleman came and he raised his hand and said, listen, I could not figure out how computer code dealt at all with diversity and inclusion, and I wanted to come figure that out. But what I learned through this session was what code switching is, and I also figured out, and you could hear the epiphany, right? That, he was from the eastern part of North Carolina. And he said that he had received coaching that if he wanted to progress in his career in management, he needed to take what was basically, he needed to take some elocution classes, right? Because of how he spoke. And he opted not to do that, but was still able to move up the ranks. And he said, I was able to not do that. I stayed in my little town, and was able to progress. But what he recognized was that people can't take the skin off. They can't do much with the hair. When you walk into a room as your full self, you don't often have an option of choosing not to. And that was, for him, was an epiphany. And I know he left that session a different person with a different perspective. And so for me, a lot of the work we're doing, we've got training classes, we have all kinds of programs that are made to advance diverse leaders that have been successful. But it's those types of interactions that occur. And I'm sure at least one happens per session where someone walks out with a different perspective. And so for us, that's what I would hold up as our diversity inclusion win.
That's fantastic. That really is fantastic. Back to that culture of safety, feeling safe in that space, to come and say, here's what I thought, and here's how I'm leaving with a different perspective, different insights, a different attitude, a different mindset, all of that important stuff that makes change happen. So we are at 1:36. Time flies when you're having fun. So let's do breakout rooms. What do you think? We have some scenarios crafted, and each panelist will be a facilitator in your breakout room. And we have 5 different scenarios. And then I'm really looking forward to us regrouping afterwards. So we'll have plenty of time for discussion, or sometime anyway. So let's take 10 minutes to dig into these scenarios and then regroup at 1:47 so that we have 13 precious minutes to share our insights. Lori, how about you? How was your discussion, and which scenario did you have?
Whoops, sorry. So our group looked at case 4, in which we had Ed, who is a senior vice president who happens to be white male and who knows everything about everything. And so Ed knows also everything about DEI and basically commandeered the meeting. And sadly also made a sexist joke during the meeting. So we were the head of human resources who happened to be African American female, and we needed to think about how to deal with Ed. And you know, my group colleagues, Rick and Maria, were off the charts on this. And I don't know, would you, either of you like to talk about sort of the solutioneering that you did? I thought it was really great.
Awesome.
Maria, do you want to say something?
Sure, I can speak a little. So, you know, and part of the scenario was Ed wasn't so sure he wanted to attend the diversity training, was trying to opt out of the diversity training. And so, so a couple of things, you know, with his sexist remark, my thought was, I was imagining the meeting had, you know, a group of people in it. So maybe to take that outside of the meeting and have a follow-up with him where you have a more personal conversation, let him know what you heard and how his comment might be taken and impact others around him. Assume that he probably has some context where he thinks that it may be okay to make comments like this, and so give him a little benefit of the doubt that there's a learning opportunity here where maybe he will want to know that he could have a negative impact and that he would want to say things differently. So start there. If it turns out he's just a jerk, then you might need to go a different route. And then as far as the training, I mean, I think within the space, it would be, you know, some of you brought up how important it is to have the leadership really modeling and carrying the DEI momentum and message. And so finding a way to communicate about that, you know, I'm guessing some of you have some like good resources around that and things. And so it's like you could kind of show, oh, you know, here's a really successful organization, really, you've got to have your leaders taking the same trainings and show that how important that is and for the group. And so use some sort of logic like that and see if you can bring him into that group. I'm not sure if I missed anything.
No, I think you encapsulated it. Except Rick also mentioned, Rick, I hope you don't mind my mentioning it on your behalf, that is also important in whatever job you're in to keep your own job. And so to think about how you manage those conversations in a way that does not imperil your ability to do the good work that you're there to do. I think that's us, Diane.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you so much. That it really touches on a few different areas of, you know, discussion we could have. You know, that the awareness, the self-awareness that might be lacking for someone who would make such a comment. You know, it's like, well, how Neanderthal is this person? But who knows? Might have been intentional, might not have been. So how can we bring them into the light, help them learn? Sydney, what about your group?
So in our scenario is very similar to the one that was just described, except that he just didn't want to participate. He didn't have a good reason. He just, not that he thought he knew too much, he just didn't see the value in it. And so he was in the training with his arms crossed, you know, very rigid. And again, this leader for DE&I is an African-American woman. And the question is, how would you deal with it? So Rhonda or Courtney, do you want to share what you shared?
I know for me, I stated that I would sit him down one-on-one just to get his viewpoint of why he does not want to participate. I stated he could be uncomfortable. He don't want to say the wrong thing. Because I know personally with some of my friends, it's like, it's not like they don't want to engage. They just afraid they're going to say the wrong thing and cause a whole uproar. And I feel like once you get that one-on-one down, maybe you could get him to join into the full group.
Yeah. And was it also Sarah or Shelby that was in our group?
Rhonda.
Okay, I thought there was somebody else. All right, go ahead, Rhonda.
Yeah, I had shared with you guys that although I have not experienced a situation quite as blatant as that one, we have seen, because we do have required DE&I training for all of our employees at Dominion Energy across the entire enterprise. So we're talking about 17,000 people from South Carolina to Virginia to North Carolina to all the way out to Utah and back to Ohio. But does everybody embrace that, though, just because the company says that that is what the company is about, that that's what the company embraces and those are our values, even if our uppermost leadership and up to the CEO is putting out that kind of messaging? As I often say, it would be awfully silly of us to think that would be the case. Our company, just like any other company, is just a microcosm of the United States. So you're not going to have everybody embracing that DE&I. So the thing that I saw that was closely akin to that was, we've seen some employees who are very vocal on our intranet about not embracing the whole notion or value of DE&I. And when you get to that point with a company like ours, who elevates the importance of that value to the level of safety for the most part, which anybody in the utility industry can understand the importance of that, then that becomes an issue, because then you're not aligned with the company's values. You're getting into some other spaces that deals with general respect, which that's a requirement for working here at this company, respecting your coworkers. So those employees who, good for them for feeling like they can express themselves, go ahead and do that. But that's going to be an issue if your expressions aren't aligned with the company's values at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll share just one thing that we're talking about, how these messages are communicated. How do you talk about coming to a training? How do you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And what we found is that this is true in any case, right? That a single communication often doesn't always meet the mark for everyone. So we split our organization into personas. We've taken data from our engagement surveys and figured out who might be a doubting Diane. So that's somebody who's like, I mean, I hear y'all talking about D&I, but I don't see anything changing. And then we have, oh gosh, I can't think of all the terms. Somebody who just has not bought into it at all, who's a naysayer. And we figure out how we can structure messaging that will resonate with those groups, whether it's in a single message where we talk about, you don't have to care about D&I, but here's how it impacts our bottom line. And we get those people there, or here's what we're actually doing and here are the results. And that talks to Diane. And so anyway, that's another way to think about how you communicate these things to make sure they're resonating across a broad spectrum of perspectives.
You really have to target your messaging. And that's understanding if you're using personas or avatars or however you parse out your different stakeholder audiences. And it's so critical, every word, the body language, the approach, the medium, the message, so critical to craft those that really are going to resonate with that individual person. It's all about that human to human, one-on-one conversation. And the piece too there in that particular scenario was the self-awareness piece. So it made me think of Lori's assessment, because that could be a tool going, well, I understand that you don't believe that you are, have any bias or there's any problem with your hiring and your promotion policies, but how about, considering taking this assessment and see what you think about that. We are at 2:00 and we didn't get to all the breakout report outs. Pamela, do you have any quick words from your group or?
Yeah, just real quick. I wanted just to touch a little bit about on Sydney's topic too, because one thing for larger organizations as well as smaller organizations to understand is that implementing diversity trainings and making them mandatory will many times mitigate and can circumvent discrimination lawsuits. That's why they do it. Because if they say the employee knows for sure, because this is what we're saying that you must do, we've taught it time and time again, but the employee still makes the mistake, it is on that employee and not on the company. So I just wanted to make sure that I stated that.
I think that's so true. And it's the same thing with the sexual harassment policy.
Yes, any kind of discriminatory. So if you take those trainings there and they're mandatory for organizations, it can save your organization a lot of trouble in the future when or if something happens. Our scenario had to do with a woman who felt like who knew that she was being paid 20% less than a peer of hers, who she assumed was doing less work. And Sarah was on the call with me, and I don't know if Sarah's still here, if she had to drop, but she brought up some really great points. One is, how did she find out? How did Rita find out that this person was paid more than? Did she see it sitting on someone's desk? Did she go into some confidential information? And I said, okay, that's one whole other problem right there, right? But if she found out just through conversation from the gentleman, then it could be like, there's a couple of things, like you could talk to your manager, understand like what your requirements, like look at I liked how she said, don't make it about him, but make it about you. Make it about, Rita should make it about her. Here's my qualifications. Here's my experience. Here's what I feel like I was hired on. And then getting like clarity from your manager, how your pay scales and promotions are made within that organization. So understanding that first. And then I said that then if you feel like that is discriminatory in nature, that you should contact your HR representative or contact your ombuds office. And for those of you who don't have an ombuds, that's typically a mediator who's between the employee and HR or the company. That can be where you can anonymously report something. And then Sarah also brought up really a great point, which I want her to talk about real quick. Sarah, can you tell the point that you made about what you said? You made so many great ones, but I think you know which one I'm gonna say. I want you to say it though.
I'm not sure which one you're referring to.
About negotiations.
Oh, that, potentially that this coworker, this peer makes more money because he came in with a stronger negotiation skills. And so maybe he worked his way into 20% more or a large sign-on bonus where Rita, our employer, Rita didn't. And so there may not be any equitable issues here. It may be completely on how the hiring was done in the first place. And unfortunately, this person, didn't have any couth to keep that information confidential. And of course, this has led Rita to, questioning the scenario, questioning her work versus the work that the other individual does. So that was one of my takes on it. It may not be something that is underhanded at all. It may be completely about the way that they began in the company based on negotiation skills.
And that led us to talk about how women don't negotiate for their salaries like men do. So it could have just completely been that.
I love that. See, these takeaway points, just, I love the perspective. That is so spot on in terms of the things that we need to be aware of, not jumping to conclusions. But the other piece too, I wonder about in that scenario as I was crafting it, is like, back to that equity piece. How can we find out systemically an organization's approach to hiring? And if there is that bias, but the other piece too is really learning negotiation skills. You're so right. Women, I don't know, culturally, I suppose, just have never dug into that like men have. Well, people are dropping off understandably because we are over time, and I apologize for that. I would love last words of wisdom. Any last comments from our panelists?
Negotiate your salaries. Continue to do all the great work with implementing diversity. Your work is not in vain. It's hard work. It's stressful work. that is so needed, especially in this industry. So keep doing the good work.
Perfect. Thank
Ditto.
Yeah, ditto.
Sydney's
Keep up the good work. It is hard work, but it's so rewarding. So just keep up I'm not going to say good fight, but continue on because you're making a difference.
Fabulous. Thank you. More than I can say, guys. This has been amazing. So valuable.
Congratulations. Well done.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.